Thank you, Dr. Garland, for that kind introduction. Madam President Riedinger, the leadership team of Dominican Sisters of Peace, along with other sisters of the community, faculty of Ohio Dominican University, many of whom were my colleagues and friends for more than 3 decades, other friends and invited guests. It is a distinct honor and unimaginable pleasure to be standing in this podium in the Metesic Theater, one of the great academic venues in the state of Ohio. I have the honor to speak where so many other important scholars spoke, so many Dominican friars, Sister Ruth Casper of the Dominican Order, Dr. Anthony Liska of Otterbein, who spoke twice, Father James Shaw of the Society of Jesus, and many others. Let me assure you all, I don't pretend to be the equal of any of them except by the incidental fact of standing here where they once stood. As Father Garland said, each year I taught a seminar, and it was always to first-year students in the fall semester of their freshman year. And in that course, I taught one of the sections where the dominant question was, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? And indeed, I understand that this year, that is the focus of all of the various talks that will be given on the campus. I wish to speak today primarily to the students in the audience, so to my former colleagues, I'll be looking over your shoulders, to the students in the room. And I think of this quotation from St. Thomas Aquinas for the suitability of addressing the students. Because the doctor of Catholic thought ought not only to teach the proficient, but also to instruct beginners, we propose in this book, he says, to treat of whatever belongs to the Christian religion in such a way as may tend to the instruction of believers. So just remember that if you ever come across readings of St. Thomas in your courses, he does not intend to confuse you. He wants to teach you something. So what I'll be doing in this talk today is summarizing the main texts and themes of the 3 courses that I prepared to respond to the question, what does it mean to be human? And then I'll add the Christian wrinkle, aspect, overlay, involvement of that question. And then I'll close with a challenge. In fact, I think 2 challenges that I hope you students will take to heart. The first course that I taught was focused on honor and shame. And I was inspired to prepare this course when I read the text of a speech by author James Bowman back in 2004. The title of that talk was, Whatever Happened to Honor? Whatever happened to honor? I was aware, as all of us are, that for long stretches of human history, honor was a word that motivated people to act in a certain way. Just think of the closing sentence of our Declaration of Independence. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In fact, there was a time when the Vice President of the United States killed somebody in an honor duel. So evidently, honor used to be something very important to people in the West, and then somehow it wasn't. I wanted to look into the story of that. Now, Bowman provided us the definition of honor that guided our thinking. So write this down. What is honor? Honor is the esteem with which we are held by the people who matter. Honor the esteem with which we are held by the people who matter. The first text that we read was Homer's Iliad, a text that tells of 2 weeks or more at the conclusion of the Battle of Troy. The Battle of Troy, estimated to have happened around 1200 BC, Homer's Iliad written sometime around 700 BC. And we know the plot, that armies, 1,000 ships full of soldiers, cross the Aegean Sea to the area of northwest present-day Turkey. And there they besiege Troy, a grand city that even archaeology has told us about its riches. In the scene that interests us now, the prince of Troy, Hector, is pondering whether he should go outside the walls and to confront the Greek soldiers. He has been urged by his wife and his mother to not do this. Think of your child, for example, his wife says. His response, and listen for the words honor and the motivation that prompted him to do this. Lady, these many things beset my mind no less than yours. Long ago I learned how to be brave, how to go forward always, and to contend for honor. I am not so worried about my own death as by your own grief, saying this to his wife. When some armed Greek soldier takes you in tears, your free life stripped away, and seeing you in tears, a man may say, because his wife would be now a prisoner of war, there is the wife of Hector, who fought best of Trojan horsemen when they fought at Troy. So Hector was afraid to be judged a coward in the mind of his wife, his father, his mother, his fellow soldiers, even the soldiers on the other side. He wanted to earn their esteem. The next text that we read comes to us a couple centuries later in the history of Greece. It was the play Ajax by Sophocles. This play focuses on one of the Greek soldiers. Ajax, you already encountered in the Iliad. He is the big, strong Greek soldier who by himself seems to hold off the onslaught of the Trojan forces. In this play, however, Sophocles takes us a little bit after the fall of Troy, when the Greek soldiers, are divvying up all of the armor of Trojan soldiers. Ajax was hoping that he would be the one to get the shield and the sword of Achilles, the greatest of the Greek soldiers who died. But the two leaders of the Greek army decided otherwise and gave it to Odysseus, that wily, multi-talented man of the Greek side. Steaming with rage and disappointment, Ajax says, "So tell me, friends, what do I do now? There's no question about it. I am hated by the gods and by the Greeks. Troy, the city of Troy, hates me. All the land around here hates me. What should I do? Go home? Leave the ships behind here? Go home and face my father? What will he think of me? Appearing before him like this, my hands naked and empty? No prize of honor to show him? No, I could never endure that." And in fact, such dishonor could not be endured. He commits suicide by falling on his sword. A more recent work of literature that we read was The Four Feathers by A.E.W. Mason, published in 1902. The book was made into a movie 3 times. It tells the story of a young Englishman who was a member of a regiment, and the regiment is told to go off to war and to confront a rebellion in the Sudan, northeast Africa. But just before his regiment goes off, he decides to resign his commission and not join the rest of the regiment. 3 of his fellow soldiers in the regiment and his fiancée sent him by post 4 white feathers, each feather in a gesture of accusation of cowardice. 4 white feathers. Stung by this embarrassment, this gentleman, his name was Harry Feversham, decides to go off to the Sudan incognito without anybody knowing about it, and he carries out amazing acts of bravery in the hopes that he can once again earn the esteem of his friends and his erstwhile fiancée. Whatever happened to honor? Many things happened, especially in the 20th century, to bring the downfall of honor as a primary motivation. A precipitating event, of course, was World War I, the Great War, where in some towns in England, almost 10% of the relevant age group of men fell in the trenches. To learn the perspective of the German side, we read All Quiet on the Western Front. Perhaps some of you have seen the old movie or the more recent movie, or you read the book yourself in secondary school or later. To gain an insight into how England felt after the Great War, I urge you to read Robert Graves's post-war memoir, Goodbye to All That. Goodbye to All That, published in 1929. By 1930, then, much of the West had said goodbye to honor. But even in those classic works, the limits to an appeal peek out. Hector's father begs Achilles to release the body to him. He appeals not to honor, but to pity. Even in the case of the 4 feathers, the colleagues and even the fiancée of Harry Feversham tell him later on that they were wrong to send him those feathers. A little bit of honor still remains. We hear of honor killings of young women. We hear of the dishonoring of young women in Great Britain. Many of you students have been on sports teams and you want to earn the honor of your coaches and your teammates. Many of you students were on the National Honor Society. And in a subtle way, a very deep way, we want to earn the esteem of our own family members, our children, and maybe even future generations after we are gone, so that they will continue to tell our story. I'll have a bit more to say about honor in a little bit. What about virtue? The second course was virtue. And here, very simply, our guide was the great Aristotle. We know about what virtue is. Virtue is a habit that develops over time, that they gradually transform our character so that naturally we exercise those excellences in all of our way of life. I chose this course, Virtue, for undergraduate students because, as Aristotle says, the development of virtue needs to start when you're young, when you are malleable, when you're willing to make mistakes and keep on going. Aristotle says the following, and I think you may enjoy it. That is why it is hard work to be excellent. In each case, it is hard work to find the intermediate, just the right amount of whatever we're talking about. So in regard to getting angry or giving and spending money, it's easy and everyone can do it. But in doing it to the right person, in the right amount, at the right time, for the right end, and in the right way is no longer easy. Not everybody can do it. So for the development of virtue needs to start young so that one can develop over time a life of true happiness. The third course I taught was tragedy. And I developed this course because I was beginning to fear that too many students were developing what has been called a therapeutic way of living, a therapeutic understanding of life by which everything made sense, everything would work out for the best, the cosmos would treat them fairly and softly. First definition of the term, tragedy. It is not what you may have remembered from study of Shakespeare, for example, that tragedy consists of a fundamental flaw in your personality that then leads to your downfall. That's not how I approached tragedy. Tragedy is very simple in the sense that everything in life has limits. We are surrounded by limits of all time, and at all time. Limits of time and space, limits of our own mental and psychological makeup. We began the course with a work. I told you I was going to do old stuff. We began this course with the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that dates back at least to the year 2000 BC and became very popular throughout Mesopotamia, middle and southern Iraq. What is this? I focused on that moment when Gilgamesh suffers the death of his best friend. And Gilgamesh cannot stand it. If any of you have had your best friend pass away, you know that it is a hole in your heart and in your whole existence. So he has heard about a man and a wife who have received the gift of eternal living. And so he journeys there to ask for this gift of eternal life. And he is given it, except at a moment of inattention, it slips from his hands. He's not able to. So what does he do? He no longer has eternal life. So what does he do? He goes back to his city, where he is the king. He goes back to his city, Uruk, and he gets busy being king. The message of Gilgamesh seems to say, in the immortal words of Shawshank, get busy living or get busy dying. And hope that in the future, somebody will sing your song. We next read Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King. Maybe many of you have read this in secondary school. And you know the story of Oedipus, the king who comes to understand that he has killed his own father and now is sleeping with his own mother. And you may think that Oedipus, the king, the message is, all of life is determined, there is nothing you can do. Plays into the theme of limits. You have come into this world already constrained by who you are and what you can do. But that play, actually, the play itself that unfolds on the stage in front of you tells a different story. Because what unfolds in front of you is Oedipus's intelligence and determination to find out. And then in the end, he has to make a decision. He freely makes a decision in modesty and charity to leave the town where he is the king. The next play was Heracles Furens, or Hercules driven mad, very quickly. And this is a part of what tragedy is involved, that good things can turn on a dime and become terrible things. Hercules has been away performing those labors. He comes back to his town to discover that the new tyrant has arrested his wife and children, and they're about to be killed. So Hercules kills the tyrant, rescues his wife and children, and just when you think everything now is hunky-dory, it changes. A divine spirit comes upon him, and he is driven mad, and he kills his own wife and children. But even here, the figure of Hercules ends the story with a level of compassion, charity, sorrow at what he has done. I am now at the point of answering the question, based on classical literature, what does it mean to be human? And based on those three courses, or at least those portions of those three courses, you can answer, to be human means that we are all that there is. We live under an iron sky. There is nothing beyond us. We live we are limited by all sorts of circumstances, especially by the specter of death. So what can we do? We develop virtue by which we can eventually live a fully happy life, and so that in the future we can earn the honor of other people, and other people will remember us in story. But that was not the full content of those courses. In each one, I added something from the Christian tradition, because we are founded by the Dominican Sisters of Peace. We are a Catholic institution. Our students had the right to know what was the perspective of the long Christian tradition to those topics. So, tragedy. For this, we read the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark, written in Rome probably around the year 70 AD. And what does the story of the Gospel of Mark tell? In a way very similar to the story of Hercules, Jesus is introduced to us as the Son of God. When he is baptized, the sky is opened up, and a Spirit of God descends upon him. And your first thought, therefore, is maybe there is a reality beyond this world. As the story unfolds, Jesus is presented as a Hercules-like figure. He cures people who are ill. He restores mad people to sanity. He provides food to people on 2 occasions. He feeds multitudes. At about the midpoint of this gospel, the crowd seems to acclaim as if with one voice, like a Greek chorus, "He has done everything well." So the impression is that in the case of Jesus, finally, in a way we couldn't have predicted, limits have been overcome. The limit of illness, the limit of psychological weakness, the limit of hunger, but there's still one more. Then Jesus enters the holy city, and the crowd is acclaiming his name. But just like with other tragedies, things take a sudden turn for the worse. Just a few days after his entry into the holy city, this Jesus is arrested, tried, found guilty, buried in a tomb. But then the great reversal. The women go to the tomb, find it empty. A young man announces, "This Jesus whom you are looking for, he is no longer here. He is raised. You will meet him." Tell his students they will meet him in Galilee. And then the women depart, as you know in the Gospel of Mark. The gospel ends with the women saying nothing to nobody. Is that the message of the Gospel of Mark? All limits, even the limit of death, has been overcome. Do we have words for this? We don't have words for that. St. Thomas Aquinas speaks of the resurrection. Rather, in a broader view, Thomas would say this regarding tragedy. Thomas would say that there is no such thing as language of tragedy as I have described it. Rather, Thomas speaks of the language of grace. Grace being God's presence in every area of creation. God created the universe. God sustains the universe. God's presence is there in every component of creation and in human life. More about this grace at the end of the talk. Now we move on to virtue. And here, Thomas especially relies very much on the work of Aristotle. But he adds one thing, and let me read to you what the important component that he adds. Man's happiness is twofold. One is proportionate to human nature, namely what a human being can obtain by means of the principles of human nature. The other is a happiness surpassing human nature, what you can attain only by the power of God. Hence, it is necessary for us to receive from God some additional principles by which he may be directed to supernatural happiness. Those principles are theological virtues. And so we examined what are the theological virtues, and you know what they are: faith, hope, love. Faith being the total and unreserved embrace of a message that comes to us who are from people who are unreservedly reliable, the people who were eyewitnesses to Jesus of Nazareth, and their stories were passed on from the very beginning after the resurrection. Hope, what is hope? Hope is the tension we live in all the time. On the one hand, we are aware that we are contingent. We didn't make ourselves into being. So on the one hand is this threat of nothingness any minute, but at the same time, a draw towards eternity. And there is this tension that we live in, and hope is the virtue by which we embrace that tension. And what is love? Love is the power. Love is God himself, and we live into the world of God, especially the God who died for us on the cross. And what about honor? One could say that Christianity happened to honor. Christianity, with its insistence on the dignity of the individual, with its fundamental idea that human existence is not a zero-sum game, especially Christianity with its appeal to imitatio Christi, imitation of Christ, the virtues of forgiveness, of poverty, meekness, suffering for justice, and so forth. What would St. Thomas say about honor? He would say that honor is oriented entirely outside of oneself. One gives honor to God and to neighbor. For Thomas, there is no such thing as an intrinsically interior or individualistic demand for earning the esteem of others. So, in light of this Christian perspective, what does it mean to be human? This. Human life is indeed circumscribed by limits of all kinds. But because of the victory of Jesus over death, we do not live under an implacable and adamantine sky. There is, in a poetical sense, a crack in the firmament of the heavens. Death is not a limit. But in order to achieve that life, among other things, we work on virtue. We participate in the grace of God that is present in us, so that our potential is exercised into action towards God and others. So now to a challenge to all of you, not only the students. A few years ago, there was a popular film about the early adult life of the English physicist Stephen Hawking. The title of the film was The Theory of Everything. The Theory of Everything. So let me borrow the title of that phrase and pose a challenge. What is your theory of everything? The story I summarized a few minutes ago is my theory of everything. Of course, there's a lot to it. Creation, intelligent design, God's revelation in history, Jesus, death, resurrection, virtue, all of that. Over years, over decades, and a lot of reading and a lot of praying, I've worked out a theory of everything. St. Thomas Aquinas, in fact, had a theory of everything. In your courses here, you may come across his theory of everything. In Latin, exitus reditus, a going out and a coming back. Thomas first contemplated God himself, then the various degrees of creation, starting with the angels, then the governance of the world, then human beings, then Jesus of Nazareth, and then the return, the various virtues that we are to develop so that we return to the one who made us. So I ask again, and here I'll especially direct to the students in the room, what is your theory of everything? You know, you students sitting here, on occasion you may have this disturbing little feeling in you. You envy your professors. Now, you don't envy them for their fancy clothes or their fancy degrees, their fancy books in their offices, but you envy them because it seems they have a theory of everything. And you want that. You feel within yourself, and it's perfectly normal, that your mind is everywhere. Your heart is everywhere. One week you're a communist. The next week you're a communitarian. The next week you're whatever. You're shattered in 1,000 pieces. And you should remember that St. Augustine, in his Confessions, this is 1,600 years ago. He describes, when he went off to higher studies in Carthage, he described his disintegrated life, a life that did not have integration. But I'm here to assure you, it won't take too much time. Keep your eyes and your hearts open, and you too will have worked things into a whole, into a theory of everything. Now, one more thing, and then I'll close. A theory of everything. St. Thomas gives us one more lesson as you develop this. We modern people in the year 2025, we are the products of 300 years or more of the Enlightenment project. The Enlightenment project was a mode of thinking, even Father Dan mentioned that's kind of language in his prayer, a mode of thinking that privileged criticism, questioning, the scientific method, empirical data, and so forth. And this Enlightenment has produced extraordinary things. Just look around you. Without the Enlightenment, we would quite literally be in the dark, right? So, but there is growing in literature among cultural critics that the Enlightenment has worn itself out. Because the Enlightenment itself, with its critical stance, does not contain within itself any way of reckoning when we have arrived. When have we arrived at the end point of all of our questioning? In his St. Thomas can easily give the impression that he himself is a modern critical man, because much of his writings contain precise language and distinctions. But his mind included another way of thinking and knowing. In his recent book, Living in Wonder, the author Rod Dreher reminds us that the West, under the influence of Christianity, was able to balance the left side of the brain, the centers of reasoning and calculation, with the right side of our brain, the part that deals with imagination and art and music. Unfortunately, after some 300 years of the Enlightenment project, the right side of our brains has atrophied. We privilege this, and this has declined. We are entering what Martin Gary in the fall 2024 issue of City Journal calls the Great Endarkenment. The Enlightenment is dimming, and the endarkenment is occurring. Dreher offers practical suggestions by which we can emerge out of this darkness into the experience and enjoyment of a word. He reminds us the word is enchantment. Enchantment. Enchantment is the reality of the presence of God within creation. Enchantment. Enchantment means that every aspect of our lives, following Thomas Aquinas, everything in our vision contains some presence of God. Dreher, in his book, reminds us that enchantment never left us. In certain times and places, enchantment was taken as a given. When you go to Europe, go there soon. When you go to Europe, you will enter some of the great cathedrals that were built in the High Middle Ages. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris that was recently restored, the Cathedral of Chartres, and others. But where do we begin to develop this enchantment? Dreher has a suggestion. This is especially to students. Lean hard into beauty. Beauty, the moral beauty of good and holy people, and the aesthetic beauty of art, music, and agriculture, as well as the natural world, is a portal through which enchantment passes to us. Stop thinking it as merely admirable or decorative. True beauty reveals to us something of God's nature and truth. If we follow Dreyer's advice, we can perhaps glimpse the truth of what St. Thomas was talking about in his marvelous poem. I said he was not just a philosopher or a theologian, but also a poet. His marvelous poem in praise of the Eucharist, the bread and wine that becomes Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity. Here is just the first stanza of this song. I'll then give you first in Latin, then in English. Adoro te devote, latens deitas, que sub his figuris vere latitas, tibi se cor meum totum subicit, quia te completans totum deficit. In English, I devoutly adore you, hidden deity, who are truly hidden beneath these appearances. My whole heart submits to you because in contemplating you, it is fully deficient. I close then with this invitation and challenge. Open your eyes and your hearts, your minds and your affections, so that you can craft a theory of everything that takes into account that which is vere latens, that which is true but hidden. Thank you very much. It's been a delight. So to all of you in the audience, and I'll be happy to take any question or comment, there's a very common quip that people make. I'm not sure what is the origin, maybe Churchill, that if I had more time, this letter would be shorter. Because in the preparation of this talk, it started at 30 pages long, and then 25 pages long, and then it's 24. And so even this morning, I was cutting things out. So as I mentioned, theory of everything, it would take books and books to fill out every component. So I know that I did not cover everything. A question? Yes, Jeremy.
You mentioned beauty.
Yes.
And I think it
Yes.
Keats is beauty and truth.
Yes.
Can you say something about the relationship between beauty and
Yes. The question is, in keeping or having a springboard of Keats's statement in one of his poems, beauty is truth and truth beauty, what is the relationship? And unless one begins with the viewpoint that God's presence is everywhere, it doesn't make any sense. So God's presence being truth itself manifests itself in everything, including our left side of our brains, but also in what we see. So just for example, I'm thinking of a rose window in a church. So what does that present of the mind of God? Proportion in space and proportion of the different pieces, the proportion of color, so various shadings of, and so one is attracted to the wonderful proportionality that occurs in other parts of nature. And so one walks away from a work of the plastic arts or the works of the natural world with a heightened sense of the marvelousness and how lucky we are to be here and how much of that is a gift just as much as our life is. So it begins with that prior perspective that the presence of God is in everything. Otherwise, the truth and beauty is just a sort of an add-on to what we already see. So, Ron.